Welcome to the HR on the Offensive podcast, a weekly podcast by Lace Partners, a fundamentally different HR and payroll consultancy. Each week, we tackle some of the most interesting topics facing senior HR professionals. So whether that's from employee value proposition, performance management, people strategy, or even payroll, we cover it all. So join us for the next 30 minutes. And if you like what you hear, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Now, on with the show.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the latest HR on the Offensive podcast. Me, Chris Howard, joining you today with a little bit of a dual role. We've got a video which we're going to be recording and releasing out as part of a new white paper we've just released. And we are also turning this into a podcast. So you might be hearing this either through video, or you could be hearing this just through audio. Either way, thank you very much for joining us. The white paper that we are going to be talking about today is called The Efficiency Paradox: Transforming Operations, Driving Workforce Transformation whilst Optimizing Costs for an Agile and Resilient Future. Don't let it be said that we don't come up with very short and catchy titles for our white papers. And today, I have got two members of the Lace team. I've got Martin Colyer, who is our AI guru. The video to that title.
It's been a recent moniker that I'm hoping to live up to any time.
And Adam Morris, who is our operating model guru. You've got payroll. You do like everything.
Yeah, that would phrase it.
Master for what I'd like to do today is just grab maybe 10 minutes of your time to talk about this paper that we put together, Efficiency Paradox. Now, a bit of scene setting. The reason we've written this white paper is because we talk to a lot of chief people officers, CHROs, around some of the challenges that they face, particularly in the current market. We've all seen the impact of the Trump tariffs in the US and how that's impacting the global economy. In the UK, we've had national insurance contributions. And so you've got a lot of businesses that are looking at things hitting their bottom line, geopolitical instances, or even domestic, like the UK tax and some of those areas. And quite often businesses can almost move themselves to the short-term, the break glass in case of emergency approach. How do we reduce costs as a way to maintain our margins? One of the reasons we've written this paper is, of course, just reducing headcount is a sticking point. I want to think you both together because you've been contributing and writing this paper, and we propose a three-step approach. Now, this podcast is going to be broken into two sections. We've got Pavan Bilkhoo, who's going to talk about the second section, which is mobilise your organization's skills-based culture. But I'm going to add in, if you can just give us a little bit of context and framing on the first section, which is about reimagining your operating model and transforming the workforce, so all around this workforce transformation idea, which we've got a lot of stuff coming out in the coming months. And then Martin, from your perspective, we'll talk a little bit about embracing digital optimization, because I'm going to get both of your views on this. Talk to us a bit about that first section. What are we saying when we're talking about reimagining the operating model, workforce transformation?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of terms that we probably also need to define. The first one is what we mean by efficiency. In your introduction, you gave a good view. I think efficiency is often a synonym for cost cutting. Really interested to know of our listeners and of our viewers, how many have gone through or going through that multiple iteration of a reduction in force, as it used to be called. Like, how many of those cost cutting exercises have we done? And actually, every single time we see economic hardship and we see global instability, we seem to go through these cost-cutting exercises. So is there something we can do more effectively in order to make sure that not only do we reduce costs, we also increase the output that we provide, not just as HR, but as an organisation, and secondly, make sure that sticks. So the next time we have global instability, next time we have economic downturns or whatever that may be, market pressure, actually what we can do is we have business and operating model and HR operating model that is resilient to that. So I think that's the first thing. When we talk about operating model in the context of HR, I think HR is unique across the entire organisation in terms of the operating model itself, but clearly it has a huge part to play in the operating model of the organisation. What people do we have? What skills do we have? Pavan will come on later to talk about those skills. So if we think about, we've spoken about this in other podcasts, we've spoken about it, I think, in the white papers as well. I think those four hats that we see CPOs wearing. And the kind of that service delivery hacks, I think, is a really key one for HR to look at themselves and say, how do we deliver what we deliver today? But how do we do that more effectively? It could mean we want to increase what we deliver today and not do the same amount of people. And in that, we need to look at how it's structured, not just in terms of reporting lines, but also how the teams actually work together. Can we prioritize the highest value activity for the organization? Can we get the right resources flow to that work? Can we reprioritize effectively? These are conversations we have with a lot of our clients where they say, we're really, really good at delivering stuff, we're rubbish at prioritizing it though. It's actually either the person who shouts the loudest for the business, the most senior person, or whatever comes in the latest. One of the things that are prioritized. So that is one. The second is how do we utilize tools, technology, and processes better to deliver. This is where probably why it's smart having Martin and my idea together, because that's where technology comes in, that's where AI comes in. But it's also where things like standardization comes in. It's where we also look at the delivery model. How do our employees interact with HR? Actually, can we think of it? It's called the service hack for a reason. Can we think of it as a service? And actually how we deliver that service, deliver those products to our employees and managers. So that's probably the internal stuff. Externally, I think HR needs to take more on a role in driving the HR operating model. What we've seen for the last 5 years since COVID, I think, is HR now solidly have that seat at the table. What they do with that seat, I think, which is now where we probably have our conversation. When we talk about leading HR organizations, speak to those CPOs, they are really good at putting a mirror up to the organization, up to the other businesses and challenge them on what they and what they need to deliver. So this then becomes, this is where the skills comes in. This is where you can be more advisory on terms of where can you access talent, how can you access talent. This is where you can just part business transformation, so wider organization effectiveness. This is where you need to be doing those OD skills. This is where you need to be talking about transition and the impact of that on cost, on engagement. This is how I think HR can use that transformation hat. We think of those four hats that should drive that forward. From an operating model perspective, if we want to do more with less or more with the same, we need to be reflective on ourselves, but then we also need to be confident enough to push that out to the rest of the organisation.
Yeah, really, really like that. And I just want you to build on a particular point. I thought what you were saying there, the words coming into my head when you were talking about the CPO holding the mirror is almost it being that brand ambassador for their own HR function, driving the value that it plays, but actually also we talk about that CPO as a critical friend of the CIO as well, right? Being able to say, this is the consequences of if we do things this way, or this is the benefits and the upside. I think it's about telling the story as well, like we've been in the podcast together talking about data and the reporting side and being able to tell a story through data. We've got some data research which we'll release a little later this year, which looks at CPOs being better. Are they better? Can they be better? Can you flex a little bit? Quite a lot out of scale. Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Think of your bits that are interesting.
And I think from a couple of ones, one from your introduction, I think it's constant thought that efficiency comes from headcount cutting. When really what we're thinking about there is a 20th century answer and we're trying to apply it to 21st century problems.
Yeah.
So I think this is where this paradox comes in. We can't just simply try and do more for less with the basis of just cutting heads and starting to reduce sort of headcount. It's just not going to work. So I think there's certainly something there that's really interesting. Then the flip of that is almost, we sort of talk about this, let's do more for less, really talking about more value. Yes. So how do we actually start to figure out where the value can come from? And I think certainly with what we're seeing with AI is we are in the foothills. Whilst the technology and capability has been around for a long time, the application of it to business is only really coming to fruition. But it's really interesting inflection points. The technology is increasingly there, but I'm not sure many are ready for it and the implications of it, what that means for the workforce, for your operating model, who is doing what in a business. All these pieces start to come together. The technology might be there, but what does it mean in terms of the skills and the tasks, how to apply those pieces, and then the broader frame of operating one, what does that mean? So we are starting to see those things coming together and weaving that story that's just going to be critical to look at where we can get efficiency and look at how we can drive more value.
Yeah, and I think quite often businesses look at the digital side again as Well, that's clearly the panacea that we're after as well. This idea of digital is tech, digital is new products, digital is AI. We've had a few in 2025 CEOs talking, and actually in 2024 as well, talking about, well, this is going to have a profound impact on us being able to cut headcount.
So we're going to talk about the second part of our white paper now, which is focused on the skills element of it. And just as a reminder, of course, the purpose of this white paper is really just to focus on how organizations and HR teams need to focus less on this idea of efficiencies equals headcount reduction, because there are ways in which you could drive more productivity. And one of those ways is, of course, looking at your skills. So Pav, you're joining me for this particular section. We're going to talk a little bit around, because you've written this particular section, and you've identified 3 areas that organizations can start to think about. And that is identify top skills, create a process to deploy those skills, and then look at opportunities. So let's focus on that first bit, which is identify top skills. What are we talking about there?
So when you're in an efficiency context as a business, you're looking at every single opportunity to either increase productivity or reduce costs, do more with what you have effectively. And so when we say start with some top 10, top 5 skills, what you're really doing is honing in on what's going to get you to become more efficient as a business. Now, typically in that sort of context, you've got some really standard skills. You've got some really good skills around kind of lean process engineering. You might be looking at people who are skilled in AI and areas like that, where it's really easy to identify the skills that you need to get you through the next 1 to 2 year transformation program. So we say start there, start by looking at what you have internally before you start looking at people like us or consultancy firms that are going to charge you lots of money to kickstart your program.
Cool. And so obviously there's part of this identifying the skills is, of course, I'd imagine there's an element of technology behind that, because you don't just go away and, message. If you've got a 10,000 person business, it's not as simple as, hey guys, I'm just going to put a Teams message out there and see if everyone can just codify their skills. There's a lot of process that needs to sit behind that. I'm guessing technology is just one part of it, but maybe culture is another part of it. Like, do we have the mindset? Do people have the knowledge of their own skills as well? Because I guess there'll be some people that don't even know that they've developed certain skills. Right?
Absolutely. And they don't have the language to talk about it. We've always talked about experience. If you look at a typical CV from the last 5 to 10 years, you'll have lots about the jobs and experiences that people have and very little about the skill profile. So I completely acknowledge it's not always easy to get that level of data. What we find is you can be a 50,000 person plus organization, or you could be a 250 person organization. When you start to put some language around, these are the top skills that we're looking for, people are very willing to put their hands up and say, actually, I think I've got that, or I've done that before. And they've now got the language and the confidence to start talking about their skills, rather than just it being hidden in an LMS type environment. You're actually having the conversation about skills. So I think putting the language out there unlocks quite a lot. Lots of our clients have technology available and already either have the functionality where skills are attributed to an employee profile. And really what we're looking at here is people keeping that up to date. And there's a lot of change management that can support identifying skills within the organization. So technology can support, but I do think part of it is just the language and visibility.
And for us then, so on that second point around creating a process, for us, is it just about, when we're talking about that, we're talking about what it's marrying or matching all of this stuff together. It's the people, it's the language, it's the technology. So talk to me about, like, what do we mean when we say create a process?
Yeah, and this is the biggest failure I see for skills-based thinking, is we just don't have a process always in HR when we think about matching people to where the work is. We have great processes in place for internal talent acquisition, so people going to full-time roles. We also see lots of organizations having, good global mobility approaches and processes, or secondment processes. Now, when we start to break that down, we say maybe we only need that skill set for 1 to 2 hours a week, or we only need that skill set for a period of time every year or every 3 months. That's when HR processes just don't compute. That's not how we do things. We've got rigid structures around grading and job titles and line management and things like that just don't work in that context. So what I say is, really simply, let's get in a room and design a talent deployment approach. Now, this could just be relevant for a period of time while you're in this efficiency context. And in that efficiency context, we are going to put these principles or rules in place to allow people to flow to where those projects are. And there might be some thinking that we need to do around, what does that mean for performance management? What does that mean for line management? And actually, what does that mean for culture as people move around the organization to different functions or different projects?
And you've sort of, I feel like you've blended into that third point there, which is looking at the deployment, looking at the opportunities, looking at those opportunities. Is that what we're talking about there? It's about saying, look, we've identified the skills, we're all speaking the same language, but actually now we've realized we've got a bunch of people over here that can do the job over in this other place as well.
Absolutely. And what we see is in an efficiency type environment, there's not just one project. So if I go and I use my skills, if I use change management as an example, if I go and use my change management skills on one project and I'm doing that 2 days a week and it finishes, there's another project that's going to pop out from the tech function or from, my front of house type work that are going to require the same skills. And during that time, I've expanded the amount that I can do. And I can be a really, really effective resource for 2 days a week on a different project. So looking at those opportunities to scale doesn't need to be a massive pilot that's going to require a lot of money. It can just be, look, this has worked for this period of time. Let's try this person or this sort of skill set out somewhere else. So looking at opportunities, what I would say here is this is where you need a lot of leadership buy-in, particularly where you're looking at doing things differently or you're trying to break into a new function. Leaders can be quite old school in their thinking about, these are my people, this is my talent, these are my team members that I want to keep close to me. And so, giving people opportunities in other areas of the business can be quite difficult without that buy-in.
Yeah, and we've talked about that in our Becoming Skills Powered campaign, haven't we? Just if you can just give maybe a little bit of an overview of that, because I think that's quite an interesting thing to open up on, actually, this idea that what happens if managers or line managers hoard talent, if you like. That's part of the cultural question as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. So we have recently completed our Skills Powered campaign that takes us really practically through the journey to become skills powered. So we start at the foundations, setting principles around data, around technology, around culture, and then we take you through what does that mean as an employee, as a line manager, what does it mean for change and leadership, and we also then break down into what does this mean for processes and the employee life cycle. Where can we really start taking a skills-based approach, and what does that mean for value? So we take you through a full journey. It's designed so it's super practical, bite-sized, and doesn't try and boil the ocean.
Yeah, lovely. Right. I've got one more question before we close this particular segment and move on to the technology side with Martin. And that's really around the questions that if you're a CPO right now, listening to this podcast, maybe watching the short video that we've done, you might be thinking, all right, so where do I really start here? You've identified 3 areas, which, fair enough, I can start to put together some ideas, but are there any sort of key questions that we call out? Well, saying are there any? I know there are because we put them in the report, but some of the questions that we give to CPOs just to start thinking about the skills element of this efficiencies paradox.
Yeah, and I think, look, there's some really, really easy questions that will get you started. So what technology do you already have in place? Because 9 times out of 10, you've already got the technology to enable at least some of the early thinking around skills. It's just that you've not thought about using the technology in that way. The other point that we've touched on throughout this conversation and through the campaign is all about leadership. How can leaders help start to seed the idea of people moving around and opportunities, etc.? And then the third thing that I always say to CPOs and transformation directors is let's be really clear about the value that you're trying to drive here. What's the outcome that you want? Now, in an efficiency context, the white paper that we've just written, that's all about productivity. As I said at the beginning, it's all about productivity and making the best that you have. And it's really easy to make that value case. Then, if you're not in an efficiency context, then what are the business outcomes you're looking for? Okay,
lovely, brilliant. Well, Pav, thank you very much for joining me on this particular second section.
Digital optimization, can we just throw that there, Martin? Because I think people immediately gravitate towards those 2 areas of AI for efficiency and new tech implementation. But what we're talking about is a little bit broader than that.
Taking a step back,
We've been digitally optimizing 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
So actually, we're just at another iteration of the potential of digital optimization. If we break down what we actually talk about in terms of digital, well, it's applying a digital solution to often a manual or analog problem. So again, if we start to look at it, it really comes down to tech is one part of it, but it's understanding processes, the data, the people, critically, and there's lots of people there. As part of what's the experience that is going to need to be satisfied, and equally, how does that form part of that delivery model to actually back into the business? So I think, again, we sometimes get lost in, I think, just terms, buzzwords, and AI is certainly part of that. Really, what we're basically sort of talking about here is that AI is a next iteration of the digital change, right? And at which point, once we can start to see the similar types of applications and the thought process around where we would apply AI to digital tools from 10 years ago or 20 years ago, you start to see that it's actually much more around what is, as a business, are we ready for those changes? Are we ready for the way that people's roles are going to change? Are we ready for the myriad? I remember in the distant past when I used to dust down paper files as part of initial data entry on my early programs. That was digitizing part of what we're doing. We're still dusting down those digital files that may not have been well maintained, and that is often causing part of the problems when we're trying to look for efficiency in the tools that we've got. Some of it is doing more with what we've got, but the other part is starting to throw forward, saying, well, where do we want to go, and what does that mean, and how do we as a business start to evolve towards that?
I really like the way you framed that as where do we want to go, as opposed to we've got a problem, we need to cut costs, or we need to be more productive or efficient, and so therefore technology will help to solve that problem. It's let's solve future success and solutions. Just as we wrap up tonight, any thoughts from your perspective on the digital optimization?
And I think there's a key word from the operating model side of Martin said, which was that delivery model. I think it'd be interesting to know of our listeners and viewers how many have been part of a transformation where we've had self-service as a driver, for example. Those who succeeded view self-service and managing employee self-service through the lens of how do we deliver what we do better, which essentially is what we're talking about here, efficiency. And I think those who either they influence self-service and it's stuck, or actually nobody uses it and just still bypass that. I think that if we look at those, the reason will be because it's not a big part of that coherent story development of how we deliver what we can do better. And I think when we talk about digital optimization, when we talk about the implementation of AI, those businesses that will create genuine value of that will have a Muslim mindset around how does this fit into our service. We're not just going to throw a load of money and effort to say we're AI enabled. We actually are able to pick and choose functionality and deliver better. And I think that, that with what Martin said, I think it links really well with operating models.
Yeah, focusing. I always hear you guys talking about focusing on the business outcome. What's the problem this is going to solve? Exactly. And then work backwards rather than just an AI-enabled stuff. Jez, any kind of final thoughts on some of the key challenges that businesses are facing in regards to this at the moment? If you wanted to get a copy of the efficiency paradox, pop in a couple of details about yourself, and then you can get access to the report. If you want to speak to either Adam or Martin, you can reach out to them. Go onto our team page and you can connect with these two gentlemen. Any final thoughts as we wrap up tonight?
I think this is something that everybody is speaking about at the moment. I think it can feel quite lonely when you're getting cost targets and pressure, you're seeing geopolitical pressure that's around. That is impacting everyone. The ones who come out the other end of it are the ones who can make it as clear as possible for their organisation.
It comes back to trying to keep it simple. There is a myriad of different terms, problem statements that we can get lost in, but actually we just focus on some specifics and start, which is a critical thing. So the only other best time to start doing something other than yesterday is today. So let's start today and actually start to move forward and make a difference.
Hope you've enjoyed this video / podcast. If you want to chat with us, just reach out to the guys. So from myself, from Adam and from Martin, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully we'll catch you next time on the HR Effective Podcast.